The first snow had begun to fall light, soft, deceptive, almost gentle enough to make the world forget it was cold. Meredith Block stood at her apartment window, watching the flakes catch on the edge of the glass like tiny white moths. Outside, South Bristol glimmered with warm lights and wreaths and laughter leaking out of bakeries and cafes. Inside her studio apartment, Christmas twinkled, 2 string lights she'd hung weeks ago. Little gold stars stuck above the kitchen counter. A cheap tabletop pine tree with an uneven tilt. She'd tried. She really had. But the air in the room felt thin, hollow, in a way decorations couldn't disguise. She wrapped her arms around herself, not because she was cold, but because she needed something to hold. December had always been loud with expectations, but this year it felt like the month was pressing its palm against her chest, reminding her of everything she'd failed to fix. Her laptop sat open on the table, a graveyard of overdue invoices, supplier disagreements, and we regret to inform you emails, block events. Her small company, a dream built over 6 years, was teetering. Meredith knew exactly how many dollars were in her account. $402 tons. She knew because she had counted twice. She also knew the total of the rent due in 10 days, the utilities due next week, and the credit card balance she'd stopped checking because it made her throat close. But none of it hurt as sharply as the memory she couldn't shake: the scandal. Last year, she'd poured everything into a high-profile winter gala for a Manhattan hedge fund: the decor, the lighting, the signature peppermint cocktails, the 12-foot floral installation shaped like a frozen wave. It had been the kind of event that could change a career. And for a moment, it did. People whispered her name with interest. Until the accusations dropped. Misused funds, missing invoices, fabricated expenses. They called it Block's holiday blowout. The tabloids devoured it. Blogs mocked her. A partner she'd trusted stabbed her in the back and vanished with the missing money. Meredith was left bearing the stain. No proof to save her. No one willing to listen. In the months after, clients canceled. Vendors stopped answering calls. And a crushing silence settled over her professional life. She had rebuilt part of her reputation by working small events, neighborhood markets, birthday parties, but the big contracts, the ones that paid real bills, remained out of reach. She pressed her palms to her eyes now, breathing slowly to steady herself. "Don't cry," she whispered. It had become a mantra this year. Don't cry. Keep moving. Her phone buzzed on the table, slicing through the quiet. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Nothing good ever started with an unknown number. But something, a flicker of instinct, or maybe desperation, made her answer. "Hello." A warm female voice responded, professional but not cold. "Good afternoon. Is this Meredith Block?" Meredith hesitated. "Yes. This is she. This is Anna from the Festive Heart Foundation, part of the Harlow Group. We'd like to schedule a meeting regarding the Gala Centennial Project. You were recommended to us for the lead event planning position." Meredith's hand tightened around the phone. I'm sorry. The Harlow Group. We're reaching the 100-year anniversary of the foundation this year. We're seeking an independent planner with strong holiday event experience. You were shortlisted from a small pool of candidates." Meredith blinked, stunned. The Harlow Group, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country. The kind of client most event planners spent their lives dreaming about. The kind of contract that could pull a company out of the grave. Her throat closed. "I didn't apply." "You were referred." The woman replied smoothly. "We'll share more at the interview if you accept. And there's a preliminary stipend for consultants chosen to join the planning round. 3 months compensation paid up front. 3 months. 3 months. Meredith sank slowly into her chair, as if her knees had forgotten their instructions. She stared at the cluttered table, half-finished coffee, a stack of unopened mail, a wilted poinsettia she couldn't afford to replace, and the world tilted sideways. Was this real, another trap? Or a glitch in the universe? A kindness that had slipped through by mistake? She almost said no. The words sat on her tongue. Hope was dangerous. Hope had teeth. Hope had betrayed her before, and she'd bled for it. But there was something else too, something small but stubborn, a rebellious ember inside her ribs. And then the voice on the phone added gently, "We believe your creativity may be exactly what this gala needs, Ms. Block." Meredith inhaled sharply. Creativity. That word used to describe her. Now people said unreliable, risky, controversial. The foundation didn't know her history. Or maybe they did and didn't care. "Could you come in tomorrow morning?" Anna asked. 9 sharp, Harlow headquarters in New York. Meredith swallowed. Yes, I can. Wonderful. Bring your portfolio. Security will have your name. The call ended, leaving silence ringing in her ears. Meredith stared at her reflection in the darkened laptop screen. Her curls were tied loosely, her eyes tired but alert, her skin glowing softly under the Christmas lights. 31. Down but not defeated. Not yet, she whispered, almost afraid to hear the words aloud. What if this is real? But then the twist came. Her email chimed with a new message titled, "Urgent account status from her bank." She opened it, hands trembling. Her stomach dropped. The account was lower than she thought. A recurring payment had auto-deducted. She had $172 left. Her utilities notice peeked from beneath her laptop. Red letters. Final warning. Meredith stood quickly, pacing the small room, adrenaline flooding her. The gala could save her. But what if she failed the interview? What if the foundation had heard rumors about her scandal? What if this was just another door that opened only to slam shut in her face? And another fear crept in, one she hadn't anticipated. What if she wasn't ready to stand in front of powerful people again? What if her voice cracked? What if they saw the doubt she carried like a shadow, wrapped around her spine? A gust of wind rattled the window. Outside, children shouted joyfully, throwing snowballs. Lights flickered. Carols drifted in from the street. But Meredith felt none of it. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a frozen lake, aware of every crack beneath her feet. Then her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Saw your name on the consultant list. You shouldn't go." Her blood turned to ice. She typed back, "Who is this?" No response. Her breath faltered. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Someone didn't want her near the gala. Someone who remembered last year. Someone who had something to lose. For the first time all season, genuine fear wrapped around her shoulders. She closed her curtains, secured the latch on her door, and pressed her back against the cool wood. She knew she should walk away from the opportunity. A safer woman would. A practical woman would. But Meredith had never been practical, and fear had taken enough from her. She lifted her chin, heart trembling but fierce. Tomorrow. She whispered to herself, "I'm going." Because maybe the season wasn't meant to save her, but she could save herself. And maybe, just maybe, this time, hope wouldn't bite. The next morning, Meredith woke with that pulse of nervous adrenaline that always came before big moments, except this one felt sharper, as if someone had turned the world's volume up a notch. She dressed carefully, layering confidence she didn't feel beneath a cream sweater and tailored coat. The subway ride into Manhattan was a blur of metallic screeches, perfume, and the scent of someone's burnt coffee. Her mind refused to quiet. The text from last night hovered in her memory like a shadow, no one else could see. You shouldn't go. She'd tried to shake it off, but the unease clung to her like cold air. When she stepped out into the winter light near the Harlow Industries distribution center, the world hit her in a rush, forklifts beeping, volunteers unloading boxes, laughter echoing across the warehouse. It felt almost unreal to stand inside something so alive when her own life had felt so muted for months. Security had instructed her to meet a coordinator inside before heading to headquarters. She pushed open the heavy metal door, and warm air, smelling of cardboard, cinnamon, and packing tape greeted her. Rows of tables stretched across the warehouse, piled with toys, books, mittens, and holiday wrapping. Volunteers moved with purpose, tying ribbons, sorting donations, humming along to soft holiday music spilling from old speakers. For a moment, she felt something loosen in her chest, a small, surprised lift. This place radiated a kind of magic she didn't trust, but instinctively wanted to touch. She took one step forward, scanning for someone who might be expecting her, and collided with a wall of muscle. More accurately, a man carrying far too many boxes. Everything happened in a messy blur. A stack of toys teetered, tilted, and exploded into a rain of plush animals and miniature trucks. Meredith stumbled backward, her heels sliding, both arms flailing as she tried and failed to catch her balance. The stranger lunged to help, which only made them tangle awkwardly before both toppled to the floor in an ungraceful heap. A glittery bow landed squarely on her shoulder. Another bounced off his hair. For a beat, there was stunned silence. Then a low laugh, deep, rich, warm, broke through the chaos. I didn't think gravity held grudges, but clearly I was wrong. Meredith blinked up at him. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a tousled head of dark blonde hair and gray eyes that held a kind of reluctant amusement. There was an earnestness about him, something unpolished in the way he scrambled upright, reaching for fallen trucks and teddy bears, like a man desperately attempting to restore order to a universe he'd briefly unraveled. "I'm so sorry," she blurted. "I should have watched where I was going." "No, it's me," he said, cheeks flushed. I shouldn't have picked up more boxes than any sane person can carry. Also, I've never wrapped a gift in my life. This entire world of ribbons and bows is new territory to me." Meredith felt laughter bubble up, real laughter. Not the brittle kind she'd used as armor this past year. "Well," she said, picking up a roll of silver ribbon, "that explains the disaster. You're definitely a textbook Grinch heart." His brows lifted. "A what?" "A Grinch heart," she repeated lightly, as if this were a known diagnosis. "Someone who appreciates Christmas. Conceptually, from a polite distance, preferably behind a desk, or maybe through a window." He stared as if unsure whether to be offended or delighted. Then he smiled slowly, unexpectedly. "That sounds accurate." Something in her warmed at the sight. They knelt together, gathering scattered toys, hands brushing occasionally, sending small sparks of awareness through Meredith's bloodstream. She didn't want to feel anything, not today, not here, not when her life was still trembling on weak foundations. But something about him drew her in. He radiated a strange, quiet intensity, as if he carried too many secrets beneath calm eyes. "Are you volunteering today?" he asked, glancing her way as he aligned gift boxes with a precision that betrayed a desire to be good at this, even though he clearly wasn't. "Not exactly." Meredith tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm here for a meeting. The Gala Centennial Project." His hand paused, mid-reach. "You're interviewing?" "Yes." He nodded, and for a second, his expression shifted interest, curiosity, something like recognition, even though they'd never met. It unsettled her. Or maybe it unsettled something dormant inside her. "Well," he said softly, "they'd be lucky to have you." She blinked, surprised by how much that simple phrase affected her. She wanted to ask why he sounded so certain, but before she could speak, footsteps thundered across the warehouse floor. A young woman skidded to a halt beside them, breathless. "Mr. Harlow." "There you are, the executive team's waiting for you upstairs." They moved the briefing forward. Meredith froze. "Mr. Harlow." Her gaze snapped to the man beside her. He rose to full height, adjusting his coat, the easy awkwardness fading into something controlled, composed. A shift so subtle, yet profound, it made the breath in her lungs stall. "Right," he said to the assistant. "I'll be up in a moment." He turned to Meredith, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite playful, not quite apologetic. Something in between, tinted with an intimacy that felt out of place but real. "You're Meredith Block," he said quietly. Not a question, a realization. The planner interviewing today. Her pulse kicked. "How do you... I saw your name on the list this morning." A pause, deep enough to reveal he'd done more than just skim it. "I wasn't expecting to literally run into you." He held her gaze for a long, unsettling moment. Then, in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "I like the way you talk to me. Before you knew who I was." Her heart tripped. Something about his tone gently amused, faintly grateful, felt disarming, maybe even dangerous. She wanted to look away. She couldn't. "I didn't mean to insult you," she murmured. "You didn't." He stepped back, giving her space, though the air between them remained charged. "Most people are careful. You weren't." She didn't know what to say to that. Her cheeks grew warm. His assistant lingered impatiently. "Mr. Harlow." He nodded once, then looked at Meredith again. Softer now. "Good luck at your interview." She swallowed. "Thank you." He walked away, disappearing into the elevator with the ease of someone used to rooms waiting for him. As the doors slid shut, Meredith stared at her reflection on the metallic surface beside his fading silhouette. Grinch Hart, Mr. Aiden Harlow, the youngest CEO in the history of Harlow Industries. A man whose name she'd heard spoken with awe, envy, fear, and she had just called him a Grinch. A laugh escaped her half-disbelief, half-anxiety. But beneath it, another feeling stirred. Something troubling. Something she didn't want to examine. Because when she'd looked into his eyes, she hadn't seen the cold, unreachable billionaire the world described. She'd seen a man who seemed strangely lonely. A man who seemed startled, almost relieved, to be spoken to like an ordinary human. And that made her chest tighten in ways she hadn't planned for. She forced herself to turn away, clutching her portfolio, telling her heart to calm down. She wasn't here for a man. Not even one with quiet gray eyes and a smile that felt like winter sunlight rare. Unexpected. Undoing her defenses without permission. She was here to fight for her future. Nothing more. At least. That was what she told herself as she headed toward the elevators, unknowingly carrying with her a new complication. The man who could save her career might be the same man capable of breaking her heart. The email arrived only 3 hours after her interview, polite, efficient, and utterly life-altering. Meredith had stared at the message so long, she forgot to breathe. "We are pleased to offer you the lead planning position for the Festive Heart Foundation Centennial Gala. Orientation begins tomorrow morning at Harlow Estate." Beneath that, One line signed in a steady, unmistakable hand. Aidan Harlow. She'd reread his name at least 20 times, wondering if the universe was finally giving something back then, immediately fearing it was only raising the stakes before pulling the ground out again. By the next morning, the winter sky glowed a muted silver as she rode the shuttle toward Harlow Estate. Snow blanketed the long stretches of land until everything trees, fences, rooftops looked dipped in sugar. The estate itself rose like a private world, carved out of white, wide lawns, forested paths, glass pavilions, and a main lodge that looked like it belonged on the cover of a winter luxury magazine. It was beautiful in a quiet, regal way, not ostentatious, but overwhelmingly intentional. For a moment, Meredith felt out of place in her carefully chosen coat and boots. She wondered whether she was stepping too far into a world that didn't want or couldn't hold someone like her. But then she remembered the text, warning her not to come, and a stubborn flame flared inside her. She walked through the entrance doors, with her chin lifted just enough to remind herself that she'd earned this. Inside the vast lobby, volunteers and staff bustled around, arranging wreaths, checking lists, tapping on tablets. Snow dusted the tall windows and made the room glow. She barely had time to take in the space before she noticed him. Aidan Harlow approached from the far side of the room, hands in his coat pockets. Posture straight, but not rigid. He looked different here, more in control, more himself, yet still carrying that faint shadow she'd seen at the warehouse, a kind of hidden loneliness she couldn't quite name. When he reached her, he paused, as though assessing whether he was allowed to smile. Then he did small, sincere, a flicker of warmth beneath ice. "You're here." The way he said it made something flutter low in her stomach. She forced herself to breathe. "I was invited." "Yes." His eyes held hers for a beat longer than polite. "By me." A faint heat crept up her neck. "Then I suppose I should thank you." "You shouldn't," he said quietly. "You deserved it." He turned before she could reply, motioning for her to follow. "Let me show you the grounds." They stepped outside together into the crisp air. The estate stretched out like a winter dream. String lights waiting to be hung, evergreen archways, a frozen lake reflecting the pale morning sky. Aidan walked beside her with a purposeful stride, but there was a subtle tension in his shoulders, as though he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to be near her. She found that oddly disarming. As they moved through the property, he shifted into a different version of himself, composed, observant, almost painfully polite. He explained the layout of the estate, pointed out where the gala tents would be erected, where the VIP lounge would stand, where the choir platform would overlook the lake. His voice was warm, but measured, as if he'd built invisible walls around each sentence. Meredith studied him when he wasn't looking. There was something in the way he held himself alone, even when surrounded by people, that tugged at her chest. A man made of winter and restraint. A man who had forgotten the warmth of wanting something for himself. She didn't know why that realization pierced her so deeply. Near a quiet corner of the estate, where snow fell in delicate spirals, she spoke without planning to. "My great-grandmother had a philosophy," she said, brushing her glove lightly along a cedar bough. "One to keep, one to give." Aidan slowed, turning toward her fully, as if the rest of the world had paused too. "What does it mean?" "It means that a gift should be two things," she said. "Meeting his gaze, one that brings joy to the person receiving it, and another they can pass forward. Something that reminds them giving is its own kind of happiness." She hesitated. She believed generosity multiplies, for the first time since she arrived. Aiden's expression shifted, softened in a way that made her pulse thrum. "That's beautiful," he murmured, voice low. "I've never heard it put like that." Most people nodded politely when she mentioned Gigi. Aiden listened, as though every word mattered, as though her memories were precious simply because they belonged to her. His eyes were steady, silver light, carrying a quiet ache she felt more than saw. Something inside Meredith cracked open, not romantically, not foolishly, but in recognition. A meeting of two people who had both carried sorrow in silence for too long. The moment lingered, delicate as snowfall. Then he cleared his throat slightly, looking away, and the spell fractured. "We should go over the donor engagement plan." "Right." She forced a light tone. "Work." But he didn't move. And for one fragile second, she thought he might ask more about Gigi, about her childhood, about the shadows behind her eyes. Instead, he reached for a small box on the bench nearby. "We can start with the gift demonstrations. The board wants these wrapped a specific way." He opened the supplies, revealing bright paper and ribbon. "Show me how you'd do it." She smiled, despite herself. "Are you sure? Last time you nearly started an avalanche of teddy bears." Aiden's ears turned faintly pink. "I'm willing to improve." They stood closer than she intended as she reached for a sheet of gold wrapping paper. The space between them compressed, filled with a hush that made the icy air feel warmer. Meredith guided his hands, steadying the box, smoothing the paper, and when her fingertips brushed the back of his knuckles, something sharp and tender shot through her. Not a thrill of attraction alone, but a deeper pull. A recognition of wounded parts reaching toward each other instinctively, silently. Aiden's breath caught, almost imperceptibly. His eyes flicked up to hers, searching, questioning, not with the confidence of a powerful man, but with the vulnerability of someone who hadn't expected to feel anything. "Sorry," she whispered, though she didn't move her hand. "Don't be," he replied softly, his voice a shade lower than before. The world around them narrowed, the snow, the quiet, the distant hum of staff preparations, until only the two of them seemed to exist in that sliver of winter. Their hands lingered longer than necessary on the fold of the ribbon. Her pulse quickened. He swallowed hard, and in that nearly imperceptible tension, Meredith sensed how lonely he'd been. Not the kind of loneliness solved by wealth or status, but the kind that lived deep inside the bones, the same kind she knew too well. She pulled her hand back slowly, feeling suddenly exposed. "So, that's the first step." Aiden nodded, though his gaze remained on her for another heartbeat, an unspoken question, a hesitation, a wanting he wasn't allowed to name. Before either of them spoke again, someone called Aiden's name from across the courtyard. His expression tightened, the real world rushing back, with its responsibilities, expectations, and the invisible chains that seemed to bind him. He exhaled. "Duty calls." Meredith managed a small smile. "Go. I'll finish wrapping this one." As he walked away, she watched the trace of loneliness settle on his shoulders once more, as though the moment they shared had briefly peeled away a layer he now had to put back on. And something inside her whispered, quiet but undeniable, that this man was going to change her life in ways she wasn't ready to understand. And perhaps, even more frighteningly, she might change his. Snow continued falling through the afternoon and into the early evening, softening the sounds around Harlow Estate until everything felt muted, hushed, almost sacred. By the time the last of the staff cleared out and the volunteers headed home, the estate had settled into a deep winter quiet, lamps glowing through frosted windows, the hum of distant heating vents, the occasional crackle of ice shifting on the lake. Meredith stayed behind in one of the preparation rooms, sorting through floral samples and revised layout notes. She needed the distraction, needed something precise and logical to focus on, but every so often, her mind drifted back to the moment earlier that day, the brush of Aiden's hand against hers, the look in his eyes, the way the world felt smaller, quieter. When he listened to her, dangerously intimate, comforting in a way she couldn't afford. She tried to shake it off. This was work, a contract, a lifeline. She wasn't here to fall for someone, especially not someone like him, someone whose life operated on a scale she couldn't begin to touch. Yet she couldn't ignore the fact that the closer she got to him, the more clearly she sensed the fracture lines beneath his polished surface, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the silence that clung to him like a second skin, the grief he carried like a secret. Still working, the voice broke through the quiet, low and warm, and she turned to find Aiden leaning against the doorframe. He looked different now, tie gone, sleeves rolled, hair slightly mussed, as if the day had worn him down, just enough to reveal something unguarded beneath the CEO precision. He nodded toward the papers in her hands. "You've been here for hours." "So have you," she replied softly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped into the room, hands tucked in his pockets. "I thought you might be hungry. The kitchen's still open." Meredith hesitated. She knew she should decline, keep distance, maintain professional boundaries. But her heart betrayed her, swelling at the idea of warmth, company, something gentle in a landscape that had felt so relentlessly cold. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just a little while." The estate's kitchen was softly lit, full of lingering scents: brown sugar, cinnamon, melted butter. Pots hung above a long island, and trays of cooling cookies were stacked neatly on racks. Only one lamp glowed near the stove, casting everything in amber light. It felt strangely intimate, like stepping into a memory instead of a room. Aiden moved comfortably in the space, though she suspected he rarely spent time here. He opened cupboards, searching. "I think the staff left ingredients out for a late-night batch." He pulled out flour and a tin of cocoa. "Do you bake?" "Only when emotionally compromised," she said lightly before she could stop herself. He chuckled under his breath. "Then we're both in trouble." They fell into an easy rhythm, measuring, sifting, mixing. Their elbows brushed occasionally, each time. Meredith told herself it didn't mean anything and failed to believe it. There was something soothing about the quiet domesticity of it, the soft whir of the mixer, the glow of the oven light reflecting off their faces. It felt like stepping outside of time. It felt like stepping inside a life that wasn't hers, but could have been, in another world. At one point, as she reached across him for the vanilla extract, her hand accidentally grazed his forearm. He stiffened, not in discomfort, but in surprise, as though touch had become so rare, he'd forgotten the instinctive response. She pulled back quickly. "Sorry. You don't have to apologize," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her chest tighten. They shaped the cookie dough in silence for a moment before Aiden finally spoke, his tone quieter, a shade raw. "My father used to bake with me." She looked up at him, surprised. "He founded the Festive Heart Foundation." Aiden continued, eyes fixed on the dough between his hands. He believed generosity was the core of everything, even business, even leadership. And he lived like that. Every weekend, every holiday. He made time. Meredith sensed the fracture line in his words before she saw it on his face. The shadow that crossed his features like a cloud passing through winter light. He died 4 years ago, Aiden said. Sudden. I wasn't prepared. He exhaled slowly, and after that, I think something in me froze. I poured everything into the company, into the foundation, into obligations. I stopped. Feeling things, at least. Stopped letting myself. She swallowed, her heart thudding. I'm sorry. He shook his head slightly. I'm not good at talking about this. Most people only want the version of me that signs checks and makes decisions, not the one who... He hesitated, then forced out the words. Not the one who misses his father more than he can explain. Meredith's pulse softened. She wiped her hands on a towel and leaned slightly against the counter beside him. You don't have to explain it. I know what loss does. He looked at her, not asking but waiting for permission, for connection, for something he hadn't dared reach for in a long time. She inhaled slowly. Last year, the scandal Everything I Lost It came from someone I trusted, someone I believed in. Her voice cracked before she steadied it. He framed me, lied about financial discrepancies, and overnight, my name became poison. I kept telling myself it would blow over, that the truth would surface, but it never did. He disappeared. And She swallowed hard. I learned that trust is dangerous when put in the wrong hands. Aiden's brows drew together. Not pity, something fiercer. That's unforgivable. It nearly broke me. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. Not losing the work, losing the belief that anyone would ever see me clearly again. Silence settled between them, dense but warm. Two wounds pressed close, but not yet touching. Aiden set down the baking sheet slowly, then leaned his palms against the counter as if grounding himself. He spoke with measured honesty, not rehearsed or guarded, just true. I've forgotten what it feels like to trust someone. I didn't notice how much it changed me until recently. His gaze flicked to her, and it wasn't intense. It was vulnerable. Until you... Her breath faltered. It felt like the room contracted around them, like the heat from the oven gathered in a single point right between their bodies. I forgot too, she whispered, surprising herself with the confession. Their eyes held, long enough for the air to thicken, long enough for the gravity between them to shift. There was no naive rush, no reckless spark. What surged between them was deeper, heavier, born from quiet longing and scar tissue, dangerous and real. Aiden stepped half a breath closer. Meredith. She didn't move away. Couldn't. For a suspended moment, neither spoke. The distant tick of the oven timer echoed softly. Snow pressed against the windows like a held breath. And in the small, golden-lit kitchen of Harlow Estate, two people who had spent years building walls found themselves standing inside the same fragile, beautiful silence. One that felt like the beginning of something they weren't sure either of them was allowed to want. Then the oven beeped sharply, breaking the spell. They both blinked, stepping back at the same time, as if waking from a dream they'd shared privately and too intimately. Aiden cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. Cookies are done, right? She murmured, though her pulse still thrummed with everything they hadn't said. But one truth echoed in both their chests. Undeniable and quietly terrifying, something had begun tonight. And neither of them knew how to stop it. The next morning unfolded like a storm, disguised as calm. Snow fell in slow spirals over Harlow Estate, muffling everything beneath a soft white hush. But inside the main lodge, tension thickened the air like smoke. Someone from the board had announced an emergency meeting. Staff moved quickly. Assistants whispered in corners. And Aiden, he looked like a man bracing against something he already knew would hurt. He left her early to attend the closed-door session, offering only a tight, distant nod that didn't match the warmth of the night they'd shared in the kitchen. Meredith tried to focus on the event schedule spread across the table in front of her, but every line blurred until the words dissolved into meaningless shapes. Her chest felt strangely tight, as if a premonition pressed against her ribs. She could still feel the echo of last night, his voice low, his confession almost fragile, the heat of his nearness. It had been real. She knew it. He knew it. And that made the quiet distance of this morning feel dangerously out of tune. Unable to think. She wandered into the hallway outside the boardroom, pretending she had a reason to be there, checking decor, reviewing signage, anything to justify her presence. She told herself she wasn't waiting for him, but her heartbeat said otherwise. Voices rose inside the meeting room. Harsh, graveled, urgent. Then she heard Aiden's. No. Absolutely not. There must be another option. A cold ripple slid down her spine. She edged closer to the door, unable to stop herself. A board member's voice answered sharp, clipped, impatient. There isn't. Aiden. Marchesa Capital is our last lifeline. The market downturn hit us harder than projected. If the merger collapses, Harlow Industries collapses with it. Another voice chimed in, and with it, the Festive Heart Foundation. Millions of children depend on us every Christmas. You know that better than anyone. Meredith's breath stopped. The foundation, the kids, the very heart of everything this season was supposed to represent. Someone cleared his throat before speaking again. The Marchesa terms are clear. The heiress, Dahlia, becomes a voting partner only if the families are formally united. The merger contract requires an engagement, public and binding. A sick silence followed. Meredith felt her pulse implode, her lungs burning as if the air had turned solid inside her chest. Aiden spoke again, softer now, stripped of his usual authority. You're asking me to agree to an engagement I don't want. We're asking you to save everything your father built. Another director said, if you don't agree, the board will have no choice but to remove you as CEO. Marchesa will walk. The foundation will lose 90% of its funding. Those children will wake up to nothing. Nothing. The word hit like an icicle straight to her heart. Aiden didn't respond for a long time. When he did, his voice sounded hollow, like winter wind passing through an empty space. You're forcing me to choose between my life and theirs. It's not personal, the director replied. It's strategic, but it was personal, deeply. And Meredith heard it in every troubled breath Aiden took. Give me time, he whispered. You have until the gala. Someone answered. After that, we proceed without you. Her fingers trembled. She stepped back slowly, pulse hammering loud enough she worried someone might hear it from inside the room. Her stomach twisted with disbelief, hurt, and something darker, because she suddenly understood with brutal clarity that their fragile, blooming connection had hit a wall harder than she could have ever imagined. An engagement, a merger, a future designed in negotiations rather than affection. Her chest felt like it was cracking open. She turned and slipped down the hall before anyone could see her. The world blurred. Decorations shimmered like distant lights underwater. Snow pressed against the windows as if trying to follow her. She didn't know where she was going until she reached the far wing of the estate a quiet corner filled with the faint scent of pine and old wood. She pressed a hand to the wall, steadying herself. She had fallen for a man who did not belong to her, who could never belong to her, and it wasn't his fault, or hers. But the pain was still sharp enough to steal her breath. Footsteps sounded behind her, quick, urgent. Meredith, wait. Her heart clenched painfully at the sound of his voice. She didn't turn, couldn't, not when her eyes burned and her throat felt too tight to speak. Aiden stopped a few steps away, breathing unevenly, like he'd run through the estate to find her. You were there, he said quietly, not accusatory, just aching. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean to listen. I'm glad you did. His voice trembled at the edges. I didn't know how to tell you. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, the world tilted. The weight of loss fresh, unexpected, devastating settled in her chest, like ice. Mare, he whispered. Please look at me. She shook her head. Don't make this harder. His steps closed the distance until she could feel heat radiating from him. Not touching her, but close enough to unravel her resolve. I need you, he said softly, and the vulnerability in those words broke something open inside her. Aiden Harlow, a man who lived behind controlled silence, said the one thing she wasn't strong enough to hear, slowly, painfully. She turned toward him. His eyes held the same storm she felt in her own chest. Fear, want, helplessness. Say you need me too, he whispered. Just once. Say it. Her lips parted, but the words cut on their way out. I do, she breathed, voice fragile as frost. I need you. She blinked hard, tears slipping despite her attempts to hold them back. But not a version of you that belongs to someone else. Aiden flinched visibly as if her words sliced through him. I don't belong to her, he protested, desperate. This isn't about love. You heard what's at stake. That doesn't make it hurt less, she whispered. It doesn't make it any less real. He reached for her, but she stepped back, trembling. Mare, please, I can't do this, she said, voice barely holding steady. I can't be the woman waiting in the shadows while the world calls someone else your future. He froze. Her next words were soft, but they shattered both of them. You deserve happiness, Aiden, but not at the cost of mine. Silence crashed over them like an avalanche. He stood still, breath shaking, eyes hollowing into something unbearably lonely. She walked away before he could speak again, and as the snow pressed against the windows and the world outside blurred into white, Aiden remained rooted to the spot, feeling the cold spread through him, cold deeper than winter, colder than grief. The cold of a man who had just realized he could lose everything that mattered. The cold of a man whose heart, for the first time in years, had dared to open only to feel it fracture. The days before the gala blurred into a storm of deadlines and glittering chaos. Meredith threw herself into work with a desperation she'd never admitted, moving from one task to another with relentless precision, checking lighting placement, confirming vendor deliveries, reviewing seating charts until her eyes throbbed. Anything to keep her heart from drifting toward the man she was trying not to think about. But the estate was a cruel place for forgetting. Every hallway held the ghost of a conversation. Every snowfall whispered the memory of warmth from a night she wished she could erase or relive. She still didn't know which one. She avoided the west wing where the board met, avoided the kitchen where their hands had brushed over dough, avoided Aiden most of all. If she sensed his footsteps approaching, she found another hallway. If she heard his voice near the rehearsal tent, She slipped through side doors and disappeared behind volunteers. Her chest clenched every time she saw his shadow. But she told herself she was doing the right thing. Stepping back before either of them drowned. Protecting the last intact pieces of herself. Except it didn't feel like protection. It felt like bleeding quietly into winter. The night before the gala. The estate hummed with activity well past midnight. Technicians tested lights across the frozen lake. Staff hurried back and forth with garlands, crates, and sound equipment. But in the secluded prep suite, Meredith had claimed as her temporary workspace a room lit only by a desk lamp and the glow of her laptop. Everything was still. She was reviewing the final run-through for the presentation, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled when she clicked to the next slide. She hadn't eaten dinner. She wasn't sure she'd spoken to anyone in the past 2 hours. Silence pressed so heavily around her, it felt like another presence in the room. A presence she didn't want, or didn't want to admit she wanted. Her eyes burned from fatigue and unshed tears she refused to shed, and she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. She could still hear those words from the boardroom like a distant echo engagement. Merger. Millions of children. No choice. She tried to remind herself this wasn't her world. These decisions weren't hers to carry. But her heart didn't obey logic. It betrayed her, beating too quickly every time she remembered the haunted look in Aiden's eyes. She closed her laptop with a soft click and exhaled shakily. She needed sleep, not more thinking. She stood, then froze. Soft footsteps padded down the empty hall outside. Slow, hesitant, as if the person walking had rehearsed every step and still doubted it. Her pulse quickened. The door didn't open at first. It hovered on the edge of being opened, the faintest shift in the handle, a breath held beyond the threshold. Then, quietly, his voice, low, fragile in a way she'd never heard from him. It pulled something deep inside her chest, taut. Her heart thudded, warning her, pleading with her, she wasn't sure which. She remained still, gripping the edge of the desk to keep from moving toward him. The door creaked open. Aiden stepped inside, and he looked devastated. He wore no mask tonight, no CEO composure, no practiced calm, no polished distance. His suit jacket was gone, the sleeves of his shirt rumpled. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times, and his eyes, those steady gray eyes, looked like winter after a storm, raw, hollow, surviving but not untouched. Meredith swallowed hard. Aiden, you shouldn't be here. He closed the door gently behind him, as if afraid sound alone might shatter something between them. I know, he murmured, but I didn't know where else to go. Her chest tightened painfully. You have responsibilities, decisions to make, people waiting for you. I know, he repeated, stepping closer. Not enough to touch her, just enough that she felt the gravity of him again. But none of that stopped me from thinking about you. She looked away. Don't. Why? His voice broke almost imperceptibly. Why does it scare you so much to look at me now? You know why? She tried to steady her tone, but it trembled despite her. Whatever is happening between you and Marquesa, whatever agreements or conditions or obligations. He cut in quietly. That's all it is. Mare, nothing more. But it doesn't matter, she whispered, shaking her head. Not when the world expects you to belong to someone else. Aiden took another slow step toward her, his voice lowered to a confession. I don't belong to anyone. Her breath hitched. He looked at her as though she were the only thing anchoring him to the ground. Mare, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Every choice feels wrong. The board wants me to sacrifice my life for the merger. If I refuse, the foundation collapses and millions of kids lose Christmas. If I agree, I lose myself. And somewhere between those two nightmares, he exhaled shakily. I'm losing you. She closed her eyes, pained. You never had me. That's not true. His voice was soft but fierce. Something happened between us. Maybe it shouldn't have. Maybe it was a mistake. But don't lie and tell me you didn't feel it. Her throat tightened, the memory of his hand brushing hers, the warmth of his body in the kitchen, the way he'd looked at her like she was the first breath of air after being underwater. None of it was a mistake, but acknowledging it would break her. She stepped back until her shoulders hit the wall. Aiden, you need to think about your future, your company, those kids. Her voice cracked. Not me. Damn it. He dragged a hand through his hair, eyes burning with a rare frustration. I can think about all of it. I'm trying to protect everything, everyone, and somehow I'm failing at all of it. He hesitated, then approached slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. When he was close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek, he whispered, Mare, I don't know which terrifies me more, losing you or hurting you. Her breath caught entirely. He lifted a hand, hovering just inches from her face, not touching, but asking, always asking. His restraint made her ache in ways she couldn't name. Say something. He pleaded softly. Anything. She forced herself to meet his eyes. The pain there nearly undid her. I'm scared too, she whispered. But fear doesn't change reality. Which reality? The one where you might have to promise your life to someone else, to save everything you've built. His face collapsed inward, as if her words physically wounded him. I don't want her. I don't want that life. Stop. She shook her head, blinking hard. Please, don't make me hear it. Don't make me choose between my heart and my self-respect. Silence froze the room. Aiden lowered his hand slowly, as though letting go of something precious. His voice, when it came, was nearly broken. You think I'm choosing her? She looked away, tears threatening. Aren't you? No. The answer was immediate, quiet, aching. But the world might choose for me. Her vision blurred. Then I need to stay away, for both our sakes. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he nodded once, barely perceptible, as if agreeing to his own heartbreak. I understand, he whispered. He turned toward the door, but just before he left, he glanced back over his shoulder. Eyes dark with longing, he no longer tried to hide. Meredith, if this world weren't built on obligations, I'd already be yours. Then he walked out, closing the door behind him with a finality that echoed through her entire body. And in the dim glow of the desk lamp, Meredith pressed a hand over her trembling heart, knowing the cruelest storms weren't the ones outside in the snow. They were the ones that raged just behind her ribs. The night before the gala arrived with a quiet sharpness, as though the entire estate was holding its breath. Snow sifted steadily through the dark, layering the grounds in white silence. Inside the guest suite, Meredith paced the length of the room, one hand pressed to her abdomen, the other trembling uncontrollably. She hadn't been able to eat all day. The slightest smell of food made her stomach twist. She'd told herself it was stress, another sleepless night, another reason to avoid crossing paths with Aiden. She'd told herself 100 rational explanations. None had settled the unease that coiled low inside her, like a secret waiting to surface. By dusk, she felt lightheaded and unbearably warm. her chest tight as if fear itself were constricting her lungs. She barely remembered the moment she walked to the small ensuite bathroom, or the way she stared at the box in her hands. Unable to believe she had reason to open it, the test lay silently on the counter. She forced herself to look away, gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. Seconds stretched into something shapeless, agonizing. She counted her breaths, counted the raindrop-like taps of the pipes behind the wall, counted anything but the possibility growing louder in her mind. Finally, she turned it over. 2 lines. Clear. Unmistakable. Final. The world seemed to tilt in a slow, devastating arc. Meredith stepped backward until her spine met the cold tile wall, her breath leaving her in a quiet, strangled sound. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Her hand lifted to her mouth as if she could hold the truth inside, keep it from changing everything. But the truth pulsed through her, steady as a second heartbeat. Aiden. The memory of that night's soft light, whispered confessions, warmth blooming where their wounds met, struck with the force of a blow. It hadn't been planned or expected. It had been a moment suspended outside the universe, born from need and comfort and a dangerous tenderness neither of them had dared name. But reality had no mercy. Not now. Not with the merger looming. Not with the board tightening a noose around Aiden's future. Her knees weakened. She slid slowly down the wall, her breath trembling uncontrollably, tears gathering despite her attempts to blink them back. The 2 faint lines on the test glowed like twin cracks in the world she'd carefully tried to hold together. Her thoughts spiraled in sharp fragments. Aiden is about to be engaged. He doesn't know. This baby wasn't meant to exist in his world of obligations and deals. I won't trap him. I can't be another weight around his neck. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed her palms to her face. It wasn't that she didn't want the baby. She felt something fierce flicker inside her even now. Something protective and warm. But the grief wrapped around that spark was overwhelming. She'd seen enough of life to know what a child deserved. Stability. Love. A father who wasn't burdened by the knowledge that his child might cost millions of other children Christmas. Aiden didn't need another impossible choice. And she refused to become another responsibility he'd feel obligated to shoulder. Her heart felt like it cracked open along fresh, jagged lines. She thought about the way he'd looked at her last night, broken, determined, aching. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm losing you. She pressed a fist against her lips. No, she couldn't ask him to choose her, choose a baby, when the weight of the world already crushed him from every side. She forced herself up, gripping the counter. Her reflection stared back, eyes red, jaw trembling. A woman standing at the crossroads of heartbreak and courage. Her decision formed slowly, painfully. But clearly, she would finish the gala, leave the estate quietly, and she would raise this child on her own. The words settled in her chest like a vow, whispered to the dark. She smoothed the front of her shirt, though her hands shook. She needed clarity, strength, composure. She would face the world tomorrow with professionalism and grace, delivering the greatest gala the foundation had seen, even if her heart shattered with every step. A knock at the door tore through her thoughts. Myrrh. Her breath stopped. Aiden. His voice was muffled, but unmistakably strained. Meredith, please, can I talk to you? She froze beside the bed, unsure her legs could carry her. Panic flared hot beneath her ribs. She couldn't face him now, not with her heartbreak raw and the test still sitting on the bathroom counter like a silent confession. Myrrh. His voice dropped to something softer, wounded. Please don't shut me out. She closed her eyes, pain slicing deep. She wanted to open the door, wanted to fall into his arms and tell him everything. The fear, the longing, the two blue lines that had just rewritten her life. But she knew what would happen. He would blame himself. He would feel trapped. He would go to war with the board and lose everything. Or worse, he would stay for the wrong reasons. She pressed her palm against the door, separating them by only a few inches of wood. Her voice came out brittle. "Aiden, this isn't a good time. Mare," he breathed, and just hearing her name in that tone nearly undone her. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to stand on a stage tomorrow pretending everything is fine when it's not." Stop," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please." Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating, desperate. Then, quietly, he spoke again. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me in." The ache in her throat nearly collapsed her. Tears slid down her cheeks silently, her body trembling under the weight of everything she could not say. She pressed harder against the door. "I can't," she whispered. "Not tonight." A hollow pause. Then a whisper, fragile as frost melting under dawn. "Okay." His footsteps retreated slowly. She heard the soft, defeated collapse of him leaning against the opposite wall, staying there longer than she expected, long enough that she felt his presence like a pulse echoing through the wood, long enough for her heart to bruise itself against the door with every beat. Eventually, she heard him leave. The silence that followed was immense. Meredith wrapped her arms around herself, sinking onto the edge of the bed. The test lay in the bathroom like a tiny lighthouse catching the cold moonlight. A new life, a new path, a new storm inside her. Tomorrow, she would give the world a flawless gala, and afterward, she would disappear. Because loving Aiden Harlow meant knowing when to walk away, especially when lightning struck and changed everything. The night of the gala arrived, wrapped in gold and winter. Snow drifted steadily outside the towering windows of the grand ballroom, settling on the ledges like powdered velvet. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of guests. Their reflections shimmered across the marble floors, the mirrored walls, the polished chrome fixtures. The room pulsed with quiet music, murmured conversations, and the soft rustle of silk gowns. But beneath the elegance, something felt off-kilter, as if a wire had been stretched too tight and might snap at any moment. Meredith stood near the backstage entrance, clipboard in hand, heart pounding in her throat. She had dressed flawlessly sleek black gown, polished hair, subtle makeup, but none of it could hide the turmoil churning inside her. She positioned herself behind curtains, behind crowds, behind tasks, anything to avoid crossing Aiden's line of sight. Because if he looked at her tonight, truly looked at her, she feared everything inside her might fall apart. She checked the schedule for the 100th time, rereading lines that no longer meant anything. Stage cues, lighting transitions, video montages, she'd orchestrated it all. But now it felt distant, like a performance happening in someone else's life. Her own reality pulsed beneath her palm, 2 faint lines on a test, tucked away in her suitcase upstairs. She tried to breathe, tried to keep her body still, tried to remind herself she only had to survive a few more hours. Then she would leave, quietly, cleanly, without a trace, across the ballroom. Aiden scanned the crowd like a man searching for air. He wore a tailored midnight suit that made him look like the embodiment of the winter night outside dark. Sharp, dangerous, in his quiet intensity. But something in him was unguarded. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something raw and restless. He greeted donors mechanically, nodded through conversations he didn't absorb, and every few moments, His gaze swept the room again, searching, hoping, for her. He didn't see her, and that only pushed him further into the quiet panic brewing behind his composed exterior. Meredith kept to the shadows, shifting from table to table, directing staff with near-perfect efficiency. When the MC approached the stage to welcome the crowd, she exhaled shakily and pressed further into the corner, praying Aiden wouldn't find her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host boomed with practiced warmth, "welcome to the Centennial Gala of the Festive Heart Foundation. Tonight, we celebrate 100 years of giving 100 years of hope." Applause rippled through the hall. Meredith forced herself to look anywhere but the main table, where Aiden sat, flanked by directors, investors, and distant royalty from the partner organization. "As we mark this extraordinary milestone," the host continued, "please join me in welcoming the youngest CEO in Harlow Industries history, the man carrying forward his family's legacy, Aiden Harlow." Thunderous applause filled the room. Aiden rose slowly, but Meredith could see it from where she hid behind a column, the tension locked in his posture, the tightness in his throat. He walked toward the stage with long, steady strides, but there was something fragile in the way he gripped the edges of the steps, as though he needed the feel of something solid beneath his hands. Spotlights warmed his features as he reached the podium. The ballroom waited, breathless, cameras pointed, board members leaned forward, and Meredith, half hidden behind the drapery near the sound booth, watched him with a heart tearing itself apart. On stage, Aiden looked at the speech placed neatly before him, a speech written by the board, polished to perfection, crafted to reinforce every strategic alliance, every calculated move toward the merger with Marchesa. A speech meant to reassure investors that everything was under control. He didn't touch it, not even to turn it over. The board members shifted, confused. One of them narrowed his eyes. Meredith felt her breath catch. Aiden lifted his gaze to the crowd. Then he slid the printed pages aside, quietly, deliberately. The room stilled. When he spoke, his voice carried a depth that silenced even the sound of falling snow outside. This foundation was built on giving. He began. Not obligation, not politics, not strategy. Board members stiffened. He continued. "My father believed that giving was an act of the heart. He taught me that Christmas isn't about the perfect plan. It's about the imperfect people who make one another feel seen. And tonight, after 100 years, we honor that truth." He paused. His eyes swept the room again, seeking her. He still didn't see her. Meredith's hand tightened around her clipboard until her knuckles turned white. "I know the board expects me to discuss the future of our partnerships," Aiden said, voice firm. "But before we talk about the next century, I want to acknowledge what actually keeps this mission alive: compassion, human stories, small acts of kindness that carry more weight than any merger or financial negotiation." A few guests clapped. The board did not. Aiden exhaled slowly, as if choosing every next word carefully. "Tonight, I'm supposed to make announcements about the direction of this company, announcements I did not write, and ones I cannot give in good conscience. Not until we remember why we are here, why this foundation exists." A murmur rolled through the ballroom. Meredith's throat tightened painfully. It felt like he wasn't talking to the crowd at all. It felt like he was talking to one person hiding in the shadows. "Legacy is not built by contracts," he said, his voice softening. "It's built by hearts. Real, flawed, human hearts." His lips curved into something almost tender, sometimes changed in ways we don't expect. Sometimes by people we don't expect. Her breath faltered. For a moment, The lights reflected in his eyes like stars caught in ice. But beneath it was something else, something fractured, searching, almost pleading. Then, as if pulled by instinct, his gaze drifted toward the corner where she stood. He didn't see her exactly, not yet, but he paused. Meredith shrank back, gripping the curtain, afraid he'd find her, afraid he wouldn't. Aiden swallowed hard and forced himself to continue. The truth is, we can't save the future by sacrificing the heart of what we are. And I refuse to stand here pretending otherwise. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath from the Marchesa delegation. A furious exchange of whispers from the board. Meredith felt her entire body go still. She realized, with dawning fear, that Aiden wasn't just improvising. He was choosing something, or refusing something. And whatever it was, it would change everything for the foundation. For him. For her. This gala, he finished quietly, is not about perfection. It's about grace. And I intend to honor that even if it costs me. A hush fell over the ballroom so complete, it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. Aiden stepped back from the podium. He looked out at the glittering sea of guests, then toward the edge of the room again, almost as if he sensed her heartbeat from afar. He whispered into the mic, barely audible. "Thank you." A single snowflake tapped against the window. Meredith's vision blurred. Her hand trembled, because she understood what he had just done. He had thrown away the board's script, the merger's lifeline, the expected announcement of his engagement. He had stepped off the path meant to secure the future of his company of millions of children, for something else. Something unspoken, something dangerously close to her. Her heart felt like it might stop entirely. And in that moment, surrounded by glittering lights and falling snow, Meredith Block realized she wasn't the only one with a secret that could change the world. Aiden stood at the center of the stage, the golden lights crowning him like a reluctant king who had finally stopped hiding from his own truth. The ballroom was frozen in stunned silence, every breath held. Every eye fixed on the man rewriting the fate of a corporation, a foundation, and his own life with nothing but a trembling voice and an unguarded heart. Snow drifted against the tall windows like slow falling ash. The crystal chandeliers flickered. Even the orchestra musicians sat motionless, bows suspended midair. Aiden inhaled, steadying himself, but Meredith could see it, even from the back row where she'd tried to disappear, the faint tremor in his hands. The war inside him, finally reaching its breaking point. He wasn't acting out of impulse. This was the resolve of a man who had wrestled with the cost of every choice and still stepped into the fire. "This year," he said, his voice low but carrying through the room, "I realized something about fear." The crowd remained silent, as if any shift might shatter the fragile magic holding the moment together. Aiden's gaze swept across the hundreds of faces. Though Meredith knew he saw none of them, his voice deepened, rasped with vulnerability. "We're told that fear is responsibility, that sacrifice is duty, that we must bury ourselves under expectations to protect what we love." A murmur rippled across the front tables where board members sat rigidly, their expressions carved in stone. Meredith watched them, watched the tension sharpen into alarm, but Aiden's voice rose, unwavering. "But I learned something else, something I should have known long before tonight." He paused, chest rising with a slow, painful breath. Humans weren't born to survive on fear. The room stilled even further. "We were born to live," he continued softly, "on love." Meredith's heart stopped, just stopped, like her body couldn't withstand hearing him say it aloud. Aiden stepped away from the podium, ignoring the frantic whispers from the Marchesa delegation, ignoring the stiffening posture of the board. He looked out over the dim edges of the ballroom, searching through shadows and clusters of gowns and tuxedos. And then he found her. His eyes locked onto Meredith's like a spotlight cutting through the dark. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. Her entire world narrowed to the quiet shock on his face. The relief. The fierce tenderness she had tried so hard to forget. When he spoke again, his voice didn't belong to the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. It belonged to the man who had baked cookies with her in a warm kitchen. The man who whispered he was afraid of losing her. The man who looked at her like she was a reason to breathe. "I'm supposed to confirm a deal tonight," he said, still watching her. A merger that would absorb Harlow Industries into Marchesa Capital. A partnership secured through a strategic marriage. The audience shifted uneasily. A woman gasped. "But I can't." Aiden continued. "Not like this. Not at the cost of my integrity. Not at the cost of someone else's freedom. And not at the cost of my own heart." The Marchesa father half rose from his seat, outraged. But Aiden held up a quiet hand, silencing him without a single word. "I reject the merger," Aiden said, and the air in the ballroom collapsed into shocked whispers. "And I refuse the marriage." The board exploded in panic, voices rising, hands gripping table edges, chairs scraping against marble floors. But Aiden turned fully toward the back of the room, toward Meredith, as if there was only one person he owed an explanation to. "I choose something else." Her throat tightened. Pain, hope, disbelief, everything collided violently inside her. His voice softened, not for the crowd, but for her. "I choose the woman who taught me that a gift to keep is a memory, and a gift to give is a future." The words struck her like a tidal wave. Her knees nearly buckled. People turned, craning their necks to see who he was speaking to. Meredith tried to step back into the shadows, but there was no escaping the fierce, unyielding devotion in his eyes. "And my future," Aiden whispered, "is her." 1,000 emotions detonated at once. Meredith felt the air fracture inside her lungs, felt tears burn down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. The truth she carried inside her, small, fragile, growing, pounded like a secret begging to be released. But all she could do was stare, trembling, because the man she thought she had lost was tearing down the world he belonged to just to reach her. Gasps rang through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. A cluster of donors clapped in hesitant awe. But Aiden didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break their gaze. "I should have told you sooner," he said, voice breaking in ways only she would notice. "Should have found you before this moment." But tonight seemed to be the only time the world might actually listen. Meredith's lips trembled. The tears came harder hot, unstoppable. Her heart ached so violently it felt like both a miracle and a wound. The host stammered something into the microphone, trying to reclaim the program. But no one listened. Not when Aiden Harlow, heir to an empire, had just detonated a century of expectations for one woman. A woman who silently carried his child. A woman who had already planned to leave him. A woman who loved him, but didn't believe she was allowed to. Aiden lifted his chin, breath visible in the cold draft from the balcony doors, and gave her a smile, not triumphant, but tender and trembling, as if he feared she might disappear any second. "I choose you," he said, so quietly she felt it more than heard it. Meredith pressed a hand against her mouth, tears streaming. She wanted to run to him, wanted to tell him everything, wanted to collapse into the safety of his arms and confess about the life growing inside her. But fear still clung to her ribs. He had broken the world open for her. But she carried a truth that could break him too. The board members rose simultaneously, a storm of outrage swelling behind them. The Marchesa father barked at his daughter. Reporters whispered furiously, but none of it reached Aidan or Meredith. There was only the two of them, two souls, who had run from pain their entire lives, finally caught in the gravity of something powerful, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. Her shoulders shook as she finally let out a sound, a soft, broken sob. Aidan's expression shattered with relief, pain, and something like hope. Meredith couldn't breathe through the tears, couldn't speak, could only stand there as everything she had tried to suppress crashed over her like winter waves. Because no matter how hard she had tried to run, to protect him, to protect herself, she loved him. She loved him deeply, hopelessly, completely. And when Aidan stepped off the stage and started walking toward her through a sea of stunned faces, through snow-lit shadows, through the collapsing architecture of a future he'd just rejected, Meredith whispered through her tears, voice shaking, "Oh God, Aidan." And for the first time since she learned she was pregnant, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like destiny. The gala roared behind him, voices rising in chaos. Investors demanding explanations. The board erupting in panic, but Aidan didn't hear any of it. The world had narrowed to one heartbeat thrumming in his ears. One face burned behind his eyes. One truth he'd finally spoken aloud after months of silence. He left the stage before anyone could stop him, pushing past a wall of microphones and confused staff. Snow gusted in through the balcony doors as he hurried down the side hallway, the cold air hitting him like a rebirth. "Meredith," he called, scanning every shadow, every corner. "Mere, please." He found her backstage, half hidden behind a velvet curtain, shoulders trembling. She wasn't crying in that elegant, silent way he had always seen her fight to maintain. She was shaking hands, gripping the edge of a table, breath uneven, eyes unfocused, as if she were drowning on dry land. Aidan froze in the doorway, breath catching at the sight of her. "Meredith." She flinched at his voice. For a heartbeat, he feared she might run again, vanish into some quiet corridor he couldn't reach. But then she looked up. Her face was ruined with tears. His chest cracked open. In 2 steps, he was beside her, lifting a hand instinctively, wanting to gather her into his arms, but stopping short, afraid to shatter the fragile space between them. "Mer," he whispered, because nothing else felt large enough to hold what lived inside him now. "I chose you. I thought, God, I thought you'd gone, that I was too late." Meredith swallowed hard. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She pressed a hand to her abdomen as if the truth physically ached inside her. Aidan noticed the gesture. Something in his breath stuttered. Her throat worked. "Aidan." As she stopped again, tears thickening in her lashes. "There's something I have to tell you." He stepped closer, heart pounding as if bracing for a blow he knew he would still forgive. "You can tell me anything." Her fingers trembled violently. "Please don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean every word," he murmured. "Every single one." A shaky breath escaped her. Then, with a courage she didn't feel and couldn't fake, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Aidan," she whispered, voice breaking, "I'm pregnant." The world went utterly silent, not the hush of fear or shock, not the breathless pause of disbelief. A deeper silence like the moment before a candle flares to life. Aidan didn't move, didn't blink, a single heartbeat. Then another. His chest rose in a slow, stunned inhale, as though something inside him had just shifted into place after living misaligned for far too long. Then he took 1 step toward her, then another. "Say it again," he breathed, voice raw. Her chin quivered. I'm with child. Yours. I found out last night. Her hand pressed harder against her stomach. I was going to leave after the gala. I didn't want to trap you. I didn't want you to think Aiden reached her before she could finish. Not with wild desperation, or panic, or the impossible weight of obligation he approached her, the way a man approaches a miracle he's afraid might vanish. He gently took her shaking hand, and then slowly, reverently, he lifted her hand and placed it over his heart. His voice was a whisper against the roar in her ears. This is the gift you've given me. Her breath hitched. He pressed her hand harder against his chest, as if he needed her to feel how violently his heart was breaking open for her. And I will keep it for the rest of my life. Meredith's eyes filled in an instant. The sob burst from her like something torn loose. Aiden. No, you don't understand. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you choosing me out of responsibility. I don't want to be another obligation. I don't want to take your future or your freedom, or... He caught her other hand, shaking his head with such intensity, she felt it down her spine. Stop, please. Don't ever say that again. Tears slid down her cheeks, heavy and hot. I thought I was just a moment of weakness for you. A moment of weakness. His voice cracked, sharp with disbelief. You are the only moment I have felt alive since my father died. Her breath collapsed into a sob. Aiden stepped closer, pulling her hand from his heart only long enough to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear that fell. His voice softened into something raw and unfiltered. Meredith, I didn't reject that merger for ethics. I didn't walk away from that staged engagement because of principle. He swallowed hard. I walked away because I couldn't build a future that didn't have you in it. Her tears fell faster. I was so scared, she whispered, that you'd see this baby as a burden, that you'd feel cornered, that I'd ruin your life, ruin my life. Aiden's voice broke into a soft, trembling laugh, a sound of disbelief and relief tangled together. Meredith, this child is the first thing that has made me feel like I have a life. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. The quiet in the room thickened until it felt like the world had shrunk to only the space between their breaths. Aiden took both of her hands gently, lowering his forehead until it rested against hers. His whisper melted through her. I choose you. Not because of duty, not because of fear, but because I love you. Meredith gasped at the words, her breath trembling against his lips, not a kiss yet, but as close as a confession could bring them. And our baby, he murmured, voice breaking with wonder, is not a complication, not a burden, not a trap. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that felt like it could break the world open. Our baby is a miracle. Her entire body shook. The tears came in a flood she couldn't control. She pressed her forehead harder against his, sobbing into the breath they shared. Aiden, she whispered between broken breaths. I love you too. I love you. He let out a sound, half a breath, half a prayer, as if the words had been the thing he had been dying to hear longer than she realized. Then, at last, he pulled her into his arms, not carefully, not cautiously, completely. The kind of embrace that closed every wound, that filled every empty space, that made the future feel possible again. His arms locked around her, his face buried in her neck, his breath trembling as though he, too, was fighting tears. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, two hearts beat against each other, no longer wounded, no longer alone, no longer afraid. For the first time in both their lives, truth didn't break them. It saved them. Winter settled over South Bristol the way silk settles over skin, soft, shimmering, inevitable. Snow drifted across the quiet harbor town, coating rooftops and lampposts in a gentle white glow. And inside the little cedar house at the end of Harbor Lane, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. Mur rocked slowly in the armchair by the window, the one Aiden had sanded and restored himself, because she'd once said it reminded her of Gigi's. In her arms slept Noah Harlow, 8 months old, cheeks full and warm, breath feathering against her collarbone. He had Aiden's impossibly blue eyes, edged with her amber brown, a color that reminded Mare of morning light, slipping through winter clouds. His tiny hand curled around her sweater, as if anchoring himself to the only world he knew. Aiden crossed the room quietly, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa, pretending not to watch her, even though he always did. Fatherhood had softened him in ways no one had predicted. He smiled differently now, wider, unguarded. He touched gently. He listened deeply. And every time he looked at Noah, something reverent flickered in his eyes. He set the mugs down, then leaned against the side of the chair, his fingers brushing the soft curls on Noah's head. He fought sleep again, Mur nodded, stroking the baby's back with slow, rhythmic circles. He gets that from you. Aiden smirked. You're not wrong. Noah shifted, little brow furrowing as if he sensed his parents teasing him. Aiden bent down and kissed the tiny crease between their son's eyebrows. Noah sighed and settled. Mare watched them both, her boy and the man who had once stood on a stage and chosen her over an empire. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night, overwhelmed by the truth of her life now, that she loved a man who loved her back without hesitation, that her child slept safely because someone else held the world steady while she held him, that the person she feared she'd lose had instead built his entire future around staying. Aiden reached for her free hand, intertwining their fingers. He's going to wake in 20 minutes wanting to eat again, and you're going to insist you're the one feeding him, Mare murmured with a smile. It's not insisting, he said with mock seriousness. It's strategic bonding. She laughed softly, nudging him with her shoulder. The muggy warmth of the room, the snow falling beyond the window, the steady rise and fall of Noah's breath, all of it wrapped around her like a promise that had finally been kept. Aiden sat beside her on the wide window seat, close enough that his knee brushed hers. Outside, distant carolers rehearsed with uneven enthusiasm. Holiday lights blinked from porches up and down the street. The world looked small, peaceful, exactly the kind of world she'd wanted her child to grow up in. You know, Aiden said quietly, Noah's going to grow up thinking cookie dough is a winter staple. As he should, Mur whispered, and he's going to believe every person deserves 2 gifts. Mur smiled, but her eyes softened. Aiden noticed, because he always noticed. What's wrong? Nothing, she said, tracing Noah's ear with the tip of her finger. It's just, I still can't believe people believed in the idea. You're bored. The world. Even the foundation. Aiden tilted his head. Meredith. They didn't believe in the idea. They believed in you. You're the one who made it real. She swallowed, overwhelmed by the truth she still struggled to accept. In the past year, the Festive Heart Foundation had expanded into its largest project since its founding, holiday kindness kits, 2 gifts for every child in need, 1 to keep, 1 to give. The movement had gone global. Donations doubled. Volunteer numbers tripled. Entire communities grew softer, kinder in ways Mir never expected. And somehow, somewhere in the whirlwind of transformation, the board had insisted she become the foundation's creative director of holiday initiatives, as if the girl who once lost everything had been born to rebuild something bigger than herself. Mur brushed tears away before they could fall. I just wanted to bring a little joy into the world. And you did, Aiden said, leaning closer. But you also changed mine. More than you know. Her chest tightened. She rested her forehead against his temple, needing the contact, grounding herself in the quiet certainty he always carried. You changed mine too, and Noah changed both of ours, he whispered. Their son stirred, making a soft sound like a question. Aiden reached out and stroked his back, the gentleness of the gesture almost painful in its tenderness. Noah relaxed again. Aiden's voice softened. Mare, can I tell you something? I thought I knew love before you. I thought I understood it, what it required, what it cost. He exhaled, slow and unsteady. But I didn't. Not really. Not until you. Not until him. Mir's throat tightened. Aiden. I spent years giving the world what I thought it wanted. You gave me what I needed. He kissed her knuckles, lingering there. A family. A home. A future that isn't built on fear or duty. She looked down at their intertwined hands, hers small, his steady. Noah's tiny fingers curled inside both their palms. A family. Not by accident, not by obligation, but by choice. Aiden brushed his thumb over her hand. Do you ever regret staying? She shook her head with a wistful little smile. Do you ever regret leaving everything for us? His answer was a quiet certainty that warmed her from the inside out, not for a single breath. They stayed like that for a long moment, absorbing the quiet, the snowfall, the weight of a year that had broken them open and sewn them back together stronger. Finally, Aiden murmured, Mir mum. You know next week is Christmas. She smiled. Hard to miss. And we've spent every Christmas since we met rebuilding each other. Also hard to miss. She teased. Well, he said, leaning closer. I was thinking, maybe this year, we build something new. She blinked. Knew something official, he whispered, his voice brushing her skin like warm breath in cold air. Something permanent, something Noah will grow up knowing was born from love, not fear. Her heart stumbled. He reached into his pocket. Mir stopped breathing. It doesn't have to be big, Aiden said softly. Just us, our son. Snow falling, lights glowing, and the promise that next Christmas, we celebrate as husband and wife. The world narrowed to a single, overwhelming moment, snow drifting, Noah sleeping, Aiden holding her future in the palm of his hand. Tears filled her eyes, thick, hot, unstoppable. She nodded once, twice, as if her body answered before her voice could. Yes, she whispered. Aiden kissed her trembling smile, then kissed their son between them. Outside, the world kept snowing. Inside, their future unfolded warm, bright, and finally theirs. Snow fell in slow spirals outside St. Matthew's Chapel, each flake drifting like a quiet blessing. The old stone church, tucked between evergreen trees, heavy with frost, glowed with warm candlelight spilling out through stained glass windows. Bells chimed softly above, harmonizing with the murmured anticipation inside. It was Christmas morning in South Bristol, a morning wrapped in white and gold. A morning that felt as if the entire world had exhaled into peace. A small choir positioned near the altar began to sing, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." Their voices light as winter air, soft as wool scarves. Guests rose in a hush, turning toward the tall wooden doors just as they opened, and Meredith stood there. The light behind her made her silhouette appear almost ethereal, soft white gown flowing like snow. The bodice delicate and subtle, her shoulders bare but warm beneath a thin, shimmering shawl. Her hair was swept into a gentle updo threaded with tiny pearl pins, a quiet echo of falling snow. But her eyes held everything the year had carved into her strength: tenderness, resilience, love, and her lips trembled with a happiness so fragile and so deep she felt almost weightless. At the end of the aisle stood Aiden, holding Noah against his chest. Noah was nearly 18 months old now, dressed in a tiny cream coat, a knitted scarf, and little boots he kept kicking with uncontainable excitement. His chubby hands clutched at Aiden's lapel as he babbled happily, unaware of the gravity of the moment, but sensing, somehow, that joy was all around him. Aiden himself looked undone in the most breathtaking way, elegant, strong in a tailored charcoal suit, hair brushed back, but his expression utterly unguarded when he saw her. For months he had imagined this moment. Now it washed over him like warmth in winter, unexpected, overwhelming, impossible to contain. He whispered, voice breaking on the edges of a smile, "Oh God, Meredith." She took a breath that felt like a prayer, her knees weakening at the sight of him with their son in his arms. It was everything she had ever wanted without daring to name it: love that stayed, love that healed, love that made a home. Her steps were slow, gliding along the aisle runner covered in a dusting of faux snowflakes. Candlelight flickered on either side. Pine wreaths draped the benches. Every few steps she caught a familiar face, Monica gently crying into her gloves, the foundation staff smiling warmly, neighbors from South Bristol who had become family through kindness rather than blood. But her gaze kept returning to Aiden. Every step was a magnet, drawing her toward him, when she was only a few feet away. Aiden whispered to Noah, "Look, buddy, Mama's here." Noah squealed, reaching out both arms in her direction, and Myrrh almost broke into tears. Aiden stepped forward, shifting Noah so Myrrh could touch his tiny hand. The fabric of her glove brushed Noah's warm cheek, and he leaned into her, instinctively. Then Aiden murmured, quiet enough for only her to hear, a trembling smile curving through his voice. "Last year, you gave me a future." Her breath snagged. He shifted Noah to one arm and reached for her free hand, lifting it gently, reverently. "This year," he whispered, "give me a wife." A tear slid down her cheek, warm against the winter air, drifting through the cracked door. "And every year after this," he continued, voice low and breakable, "give me a family to come home to." Myrrh placed her gloved hand over his chest, over the heart that had once been locked behind steel walls, but now beat freely, openly, entirely for her. Her voice trembled. One to keep, and one to give. Aiden's breath caught. Their vow, their roots, their beginning. She smiled softly, the tears brightening her eyes. "I keep you, and I give you all of my life." The officiant stepped forward, allowing the ceremony to begin. But for Myrrh and Aiden, time had already folded in around them, holding them in a moment, suspended between past and future. They handed Noah to Monica, who beamed so wide it nearly reached her ears, and faced each other fully, hands intertwined. The officiant's words drifted around them like falling snow, speaking of love as something carved over time, shaped by choice, strengthened by storms. Myrrh and Aiden barely blinked, barely breathed. Every second felt like committing the other to memory. When it came time for vows, Aiden took Mare's hands between his, thumbs brushing against her knuckles. "Meredith Elise Block," he said softly. "You walked into my life when I was numb. You taught me how to feel again, not just hope, not just joy, but belonging. You taught me that love is not duty, love is freedom." His voice trembled. "You gave me a son, you gave me a home, and today you give me your heart. I will spend every day of my life proving worthy of all three." Mire's tears brimmed again, but this time they came with a smile so radiant it felt like sunrise on snow. She inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Aiden James Harlow," she said, her tone soft but certain. "You saw me when the world turned its back. You believed me when I stopped believing in myself. You held my fears without letting them define me. You loved my broken places until they healed." She squeezed his hands. "You gave me safety. You gave me a family. And today, you give me forever. I promise to choose you with my whole heart. Every day, every season, every winter we walk through." The choir hummed gently in the background. The snow outside thickened, drifting in swirling flakes, as if listening. Aiden reached for the ring, simple, elegant, a band shaped like a crescent of light. He slid it onto her finger with a reverence that made Mare's chest ache. She placed his ring next, gold warm against his skin, sealing a promise neither of them would ever break. The officiant smiled. "By the power entrusted to me, and in celebration of this sacred day, I pronounce you husband and wife." Silence. Aiden didn't wait for permission, didn't hesitate, didn't breathe. He leaned in, cupping her cheek tenderly, and kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic kiss or a desperate one. It was a kiss full of years they should have had, but would now make up for. Full of gratitude, full of wonder, full of marrow-deep certainty. Mire melted into him, one hand gripping the lapel of his coat, the other entwining with his at her waist, as if she wanted their rings to touch. The bells of St. Matthew's rang overhead bright, jubilant, cascading through the chapel like laughter. Guests wiped tears, clapped, cheered softly. Monica bounced Noah in her arms. "Look, baby," she murmured. "Your mama and daddy just changed their whole world." Mire and Aiden broke the kiss, only when Noah squealed loud enough to demand attention. They laughed, turning as Monica carried him forward. Aiden scooped him up effortlessly, and Noah reached for both their faces at once, giggling wildly as if declaring his approval to the universe. Snow swept through the open door in a flurry of white light. Aiden wrapped an arm around Mire's waist, pulling her close. "Mrs. Harlow," he whispered, tasting the name like something he'd been starving for. "Ready to go home?" Mire leaned into him, into their son, into the life they'd built from ruins. Always. They stepped out of the chapel together, husband, wife, child, into the gentle snowfall that felt like winter's blessing, and their love story, born from one small gift, grew into a miracle big enough to carry them through every Christmas yet to come.